Wow, I've got to say, one of the most difficult things I've tried to do was implement auto layout. And this has been a learning journey in itself, trying to figure out how to get auto layout onto my application. Now, as you see, I've gone ahead and I've jumped ahead and I've implemented a lot of the auto layout here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all this. I'm going to revert my changes back to my last commit, and we're going to run through this all together now. So what I'll do is I'll just revert, and I'm crying now because it took me so long to put that all together. But we'll do this together now. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is go to the developer library and look up auto layout in their search. And you should see about auto layout and constraints. That was the guide I followed along with. And I also followed another guide, auto layout guide, understanding auto layout. So this one probably helped the most out of the two. And what I did was I read through this, tried to understand as much as possible. Right now, we're using a frame-based layout. So if we go into our view here, we'll see that we're setting a frame for each one of these, right? So we're using a frame-based layout instead of an auto layout. And what we want to do is if we start this application up here, we'll see that it's not even. So some of the UI elements in there aren't evenly distributed through the view. So it doesn't look that nice. And with auto layout, hopefully we'd get a better looking application. So as you see, it's kind of to the left, to the right, to the left, in the center. And I want it to all line up here instead of just being staggered like that. So what we'll do is we'll jump back into here and let's take a look at our frame-based layout. The one I want to use and the one that makes more sense to me is what's known as a visual. Where is that mentioned? Right down here. Visual format language. If you go to the appendix here and you look into the visual format language, you'll see some pretty good examples here. But let's go back to that, and you'll see that we have some example code here. And what I recommend is not only looking at this example code. What I had to do was take this constraints with visual format, go into the documentation and look up constraints with visual format. And both of these together really helped me out. This explains what's going on as well, step by step, and this having the parameters ready is definitely something that helped me a lot. So what I saw here was I saw this code, so I went ahead and I just copied it. As you can see, it's in Swift, so it's not Objective-C. It's a little easier to understand what's going on here since it's a little cleaner with Swift. What I'll do is I'll go to the bottom of my UI file, and I think you can place this anywhere in that init file or that init area. I noticed I didn't include self here, so I'll make sure I return that. And let's see. This is what we're receiving. So this to me looked like a hash. So what I did was I took views and I created a hash with it. This will be, let me try lining up the label first. So the label will take my label view. And you might be asking, how am I getting this? Well, this stands for a key to the view that you want to pass through into your constraint. And that took me a while to realize, but as you can see, this is a dictionary of views. So you're creating your own dictionary of views, and you're using a key, which is that key right here, and you're using the actual view itself. So the value must be the view. So that's why we're passing in the view right here. Now we see another variable here called format string, and I'll duplicate that line. Let's remove let since we don't need to do that in Ruby. And I'll change this my view. So as you saw earlier, my view is translating into that format string here. So we're gonna take my view and change that to label, and that should pass through as a string. We need to remove let here, and then in this layout constraints format string align to top. So if we take a look at our documentation, take a look at in this layout, and it says align to top. When I read through this, I actually wanted to use the NS layout format direction leading to trail. And what that means is the leading to trail means this is leading. So on this left-hand side is leading. This is the trailing. This is leading. This is trailing. So what's going to happen is it's going to follow the object in front of it. So if we go back to our code, you notice that Swift has a dot in front of it, and it just kind of shortened that constant for us, where we have to use the full constant. So we come back into here. If you try to run it just like that, it'll give you an error. And then we'll leave metrics as 0. Views are passing in the view from here or the views from there. And we're running the NS active constraint. So let's try and save this and run this with the label. And really this visual format, before I do, let me explain that. This visual format right here with the format string is telling the auto layout to center your label on the screen. So if we go back into our appendix here and we take a look at this right here. So this is giving us like a padding of 50 on each side, and then it's centering that purple box in the center. And if we scroll down, I wonder if we'll see another example. Okay, that's the best example I have as of right now. So in this one, we're not using any padding of any sorts. We're just putting that label in there, and hopefully it's going to center it for us. So we're going to use that run command. It's going to start up our simulator again, and let's see if that label is centered. Okay, so it is not centered, but we're getting something in our console here. So let's pull this up. Okay, symbolic. Okay, if you're seeing NS auto resizing mask constraints that you don't understand, I don't understand why it's not centering, then refer to the documentation for the UI view property, translate auto resizing mask into constraints. So what I did was I took that, I went into my documentation, and this is a Boolean value that determines whether the view's auto resizing mask is translated into auto layout. So if the property value is yes, the system creates a set of constraints that duplicate behavior of the view. Okay, this also lets you modify the view size and location using the view's frame. Okay, we don't want to use the frame here, allowing you to create a static frame-based layout within auto. No, we don't want to use the frame for this particular view. So what we'll do is we'll call this on this particular view. So we'll go into here and we'll do label dot translate auto resizing mask constraints. We'll set that to false. And let's see if that remedies our issue here. So we're going to restart that simulator and cross our fingers. Okay, so it is doing something now. We're not seeing that label anymore, and my guess is that it's up under this navigation bar. Now what we could do is we could set a visual constraint for the vertical. So right now with this right here, we're using a horizontal visual constraint. What we want to do now is set a vertical visual constraint to move that label that's behind that navigation bar down a bit more. So what we'll do is we'll duplicate this line and we'll pass in a different format string. So I'll just pass that in like that. And for vertical, if you take a look at the guide here, in order to have a vertical layout, you need to prepend that V with a semicolon. And so, or with a colon, we'll do that. And I'm going to give it some padding so it moves down a bit. So I'll do about 100 as the padding. And I'll just take away the ending of that. And okay, so we got the label. That's the view that we're passing through. That's correct. And we have our own visual format string. Let's go ahead and duplicate that and see if that'll work. So I'm setting that to constraint 2, and you need to activate your constraints just like that example within advanced auto layout programming. You need to make sure you activate your constraint. That's explained down here in step 5. So we're activating it. Let's stop it. Let's restart our simulator, and then let's see if this works. Okay, great. We do see our text label is now showing up. Because we're not implementing any padding on either side, it's just kind of aligned to the left a little bit. And that's also because we're using leading to trailing as our option. So what I want to do is I want to center this a little bit. I'm going to add padding of about 50 on each side. So 50-50. We're going to save that, stop this, rerun it. And so hopefully we're going to see this centered a little bit more, and we're going to have padding on both sides of that label. All right, so it does move over a little more. So that's what about 50 pixels looks like. So that looks good to me. And if we wanted to, we could start adding in the field as well. So with the field, I actually want the field to be on the right hand side of this. So I want to have a label for my text field. And to do that, for the visual, or actually for this constraint here, I'm gonna move these constraints into there instead of implementing a variable for that. And I'm gonna clear this up. Oops. And then this format string, what we're gonna do is, actually we don't need to create another constraint for that. We can put that into this view itself. So what we can do is we need to pass in the field. So we need to create that dictionary for the field and pass in the field label here. And that will pass in that view. And since we are no longer using both of those fields for the vertical, what we want to do is just input that label and do label. Okay, so that should work. And we're going to pass in the field here, and we want it to be equal in size to the label. And so where am I getting this from, this equal size to label? If you go back into your visual editor, the appendix, you'll see that we can make these two objects equal in weight in width. So we'll pass in button 1, then we pass in having it to be equal to the size of button 2. So we'll try that out. Okay, so we're actually getting some errors here, and this looks like the same one we received earlier with the auto resize masking. And what we forgot to do is duplicate this line and have it applied to the field view as well. So we'll save that, and we'll stop and restart our simulator. And let's cross our fingers that this works. This is one of the things that kind of got me when I was originally working with it. So as you can see, we have the text label, and if you look really close, we have kind of a yellow highlight to the navigation bar, and that's just because the field went ahead and it just pasted itself or put itself to the top of our screen underneath the navigation bar here. And what we want it to do is be exactly to the right. But if you notice the color, the actual, I guess, size of it, the width of it, seems to be what we want it to be, which is it's not on the same row or in the same horizontal access point as the text as we would like it. So what we can do is, I believe I fixed this with the NS layout format and matching it to the baseline. So what we do is we look in our documentation, and this appears to be the one that I worked with earlier. So I'll go ahead and I'll use that option here, and we'll stop and restart our simulator. And that should bring it to the same baseline as the label. And we'll see in just a second. Okay, great. So it does bring it to the same baseline as that other one, and our vertical seems to be working well. So this is pretty awesome. Let's go ahead and let's add in some other views to this auto layout, like the button title and the add to do. And one thing I noticed that's still here is this frame, and we can actually comment these out since we're no longer using that frame-based layout. And actually, I'll just remove them, make it look a little bit nicer. And I'll clean up this comment now that we know what that's for. And what I'll do is I'll move this dictionary key into this right here, and I'll just delete that variable. Now what we want to do is go ahead and apply this to our button and our to-do button. So let's go ahead and duplicate these two lines. And we'll name this as button and to-do button. Okay, so now that we've got those taken care of, let's add our constraints in here. So I'll duplicate this twice. I'll call this constraint 3 and 4, and obviously you can name this a lot better than I could right now, but for example's sake, we'll run with that. And instead of using a visual layout, let's go ahead and remove those two. We'll only have one visual or vertical layout for that, and I won't touch that one, so I'll just move it down a little bit. And then what we can do is we can start implementing our fields, our field views, or our views in here. So we're working with, the first one will be our button. We'll change label to button, and we'll change this to to-do button. Okay, and for that, we are going to move it to the side about 50, and we're going to add that button in. Oops, forgot that closing bracket. Now we can basically duplicate this for the one below, and we'll just do to-do button as the view. And then of course we've got to put this in our vertical layout as well. So to put a button and a to-do button. If you ever mess up with any of this, that console will actually tell you where it's gone wrong. So as an example, let me just remove that closing bracket and not forget to add our views in here. So we'll add in button is the key for button, and to-do button is the key for to-do button. Okay, great. So we've got those passed through. I purposely left out that closing bracket, and I'm going to restart my simulator here. And we got a crash. So we expected a crash, and that's because if you take a look at this right here, we need to add that closing bracket, and you're seeing that little caret right there. It's telling you exactly where you need to have that. So we'll try to rerun that now that we've added that in, And let's cross our fingers that this all works. Okay, so something is going on here, and I think what's happening is it's bunching it all up to the top. And let's take a look at why. I do believe I know what it is. It is the fact that we haven't activated those constraints. 3 and 4. Let's see if activating that has helped. So because we didn't activate that and we didn't give it a frame, I believe it set it all the way up to the upper left-hand corner, since it's thinking that... All right, cool. So it is working now. And that's pretty much what I've learned about, I guess, the constraints here.